Okay, let's unpack this because if you look at the official engineering report from December 15th, 1967, it says a tiny 2.5 millimeter crack in a steel eye-bar brought down the Silver Bridge in Point Pleasant, West Virginia.
Right, which plunged rush hour traffic into the freezing Ohio River. It killed 46 people.
Yeah, and it's just this terrifying, mathematically perfect explanation of structural failure.
Yeah.
But, if you look at the psychological reality of that town,
He didn't buy the math.
no. To them, that bridge wasn't brought down by a microscopic defect. It was brought down by a 2-meter-tall creature with glowing red eyes.
It's a massive cognitive shift.
Exactly. So today, we're opening a document called the Mothman Conflict, a dossier of anomalous analysis. And our mission for this deep dive is to ask a deeply uncomfortable question. What happens when physical science and human perception lock horns and neither side can prove the other wrong?
Well, what's fascinating here is that we are looking at an event cluster that creates what the dossier calls a stable epistemological deadlock.
A stable epistemological deadlock. That is quite the phrase.
It is, yeah. But basically it means you have two internally consistent realities occupying the exact same timeline.
Okay.
The evidence for the mundane explanation refuses to account for the witness testimony, and at the same time, the witness testimony completely fails to produce a single piece of physical proof.
Right. And for you listening, whether you're a skeptic or a believer, we aren't really here to ghost hunt, right?
No, and not at all. We are using this dossier as a laboratory to study the breaking point of human cognition when faced with incomplete data.
And man, Point Pleasant in November 1966 was practically engineered to break human cognition. You had this area called the McClintock Wildlife Management Area.
Right, the locals just called it the TNT area.
Yeah, and this wasn't some pristine nature reserve. It was a decaying World War II munitions facility.
Yeah.
Just imagine a sprawling labyrinth of hollow concrete igloos.
All overgrown with dense Appalachian forests.
Exactly. It's dotted with contaminated ponds, and it's actively leaking trinitrotoluene derivatives directly into the soil and the groundwater. It's an industrial graveyard being violently reclaimed by nature.
And that environmental context is critical here. It primes the human nervous system for anomaly. It's a liminal space.
Yeah.
You are wandering through a heavily polluted, decaying military installation. The atmosphere is already saturated with a sense of historical violence and chemical toxicity.
And it's in that exact toxic environment on the night of November 15, 1966, that Roger and Linda Scarberry, along with Steve and Mary Millette, have the encounter that kind of ignites this entire phenomenon.
Right, the initial spark.
Yeah, so they're driving through the TNT area when they spot a figure.
Yeah.
The dossier details their report, and it says it's gray, roughly 2 meters tall, with wings folded flat against its back.
But the detail that burns itself into the local consciousness is the eyes.
Oh, yeah. They're described as highly reflective, crimson red, and space unusually far apart, like about 7 to 10 centimeters.
And when the creature takes flight, it doesn't flap.
No.
It ascends vertically, just hovering upward like a helicopter.
Which is wild. So they hit the gas, tearing down Route 62 at 160 kilometers per hour. And this massive, wing-folded creature simply glides above them, effortlessly keeping pace with a speeding car.
So immediately we have a localized biological anomaly. But the very next evening, November 16th, roughly 140 kilometers away in Salem, West Virginia, the phenomenon mutates.
Right. It shifts gears entirely.
Yeah. A man named Newell Partridge is watching television when his screen is suddenly torn apart by a massive raster distortion.
Let's actually explain what that looks like for anyone who hasn't used a 1960s television.
Good idea.
Those old cathode ray tube TVs worked by firing a literal beam of electrons at the screen, and they were guided by magnetic coils. So a raster distortion means something is fundamentally interfering with that magnetic field.
Right. The electron beam is being violently scattered. Partridge's screen turns into a chaotic geometric mess, accompanied by this intense audio interference.
A whining sound, right? Like a generator winding up.
Exactly. And his dog, Bandit, starts howling and runs out into the darkness. So Partridge grabs a flashlight, goes out onto his porch, and shines the light into his hay barn.
And staring back at him are two massive, glowing red eyes.
Yeah. And the dog vanishes, never to be seen again.
So we cross a pretty major line here. We go from a bizarre biological sighting in a polluted forest to a literal physical disruption of electromagnetic technology.
And the dossier points out that obviously nobody was out there taking independent electromagnetic field readings at the time.
Right, they were just terrified.
But the combination of the television failure and the physical sighting implies a mechanism far more complex than just, an undiscovered bird. It suggests an energetic component.
And this localized outbreak rapidly expands from there.
It snowballs. Over the next 13 months, the entire Ohio River Valley region experiences a cascade of anomalies. We see reports of unidentified aerial lights.
Like pulsating orange and blue objects.
Yeah, moving silently at altitudes of 300 to 900 meters. These objects are executing sharp, sudden, directional changes that completely defy the inertia and maneuverability of any conventional fixed-wing aircraft operating in 1966.
But, the psychological toll on the community is what genuinely disturbs me in these field interviews.
Oh, it was devastating.
Yeah, this wasn't some quirky local legend that people just chuckled about at the diner. It was an epidemic of trauma. Witnesses reported chronic sleep paralysis, the suffocating sensation of being watched in their own living rooms, and elevated resting heart rates that lasted for weeks.
And we also see severe time loss events.
Right. People would be driving or walking and suddenly realize 2 to 15 minutes had completely vanished from their memory.
Which means we are looking at a population exhibiting classic symptoms of acute stress and dissociation. When the human brain is subjected to an overwhelming, inexplicable terror, it sometimes initiates a neurological freeze response.
You're totally shutting down.
Basically, yeah. The hippocampus struggles to encode continuous memory, resulting in those terrifying gaps in time. The entire community was just vibrating with localized dread.
Which all leads to December 15th, 1967, the Silver Bridge collapse. A catastrophic structural failure where 46 people drown or are crushed.
The climax of the entire 13-month period.
And like we said, the official finding is a microscopic 2.5 millimeter stress corrosion crack in IBAR 330. But the town rejects that. The folklore immediately claims the Mothman sighting stopped the day the bridge fell.
They rebrand the creature from a biological anomaly to a supernatural omen.
Exactly, a harbinger of doom. So what does this all mean? Why does our human mind look at a rusted piece of steel and immediately decide to blame a winged monster?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, a 2.5 millimeter crack in a steel eye-bar is an existential terror.
How so?
It means the universe is chaotic, random, and completely devoid of meaning. It means you can be driving home to your family on a Tuesday and simply fall out of the sky for absolutely no reason.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that is terrifying.
The human psyche naturally recoils from that level of random chaos. Myth-making is an unconscious defense mechanism.
Okay, I see where you're going.
If a monstrous harbinger was sent to warn the town, or even if it caused the collapse, then the tragedy suddenly has a narrative structure. It has a plot.
Right. Connecting a terrifying monster to a devastating bridge collapse organizes the chaos into a mythic event, which your brain can process much more easily than the cold, unfeeling physics of metallurgy. We demand a story. We would rather live in a universe governed by terrifying monsters than a universe governed by blind, random chance.
Exactly.
And that psychological vulnerability brings us to the scientific establishment's attempt to clean up this entire mess. Because the dossier heavily features the work of Dr. Eleanor Voss, a skeptical cognitive anthropologist.
Right. She builds a very aggressive framework, arguing that the Mothman was nothing more than an event of culturally reinforced perceptual contagion.
Perceptual contagion. So she strips away the supernatural entirely.
Completely. She anchors her theory in the misidentification hypothesis. She looks the local fauna, and her primary candidate is the sandhill crane.
Which is a massive bird.
It is. It can stand 1.5 meters tall with a wingspan stretching over 2.1 meters. But crucially, adult sandhill cranes have distinct red periocular skin.
That's the bare red flesh surrounding their eyes, right?
Yes.
Okay, so imagine you are the Scarberries. You are driving through a pitch-black, heavily polluted, fog-drenched munitions dump. You're already on edge.
Your adrenaline is pumping.
Exactly. And your headlights suddenly illuminate a massive 1.5-meter bird standing in the road. The fog diffuses the light, distorting the shadow so the creature looks 2 meters tall.
And those high beams reflect off that red periocular flesh,
Creating the illusion of glowing red eyes.
Right. The visual data hitting your retina is ambiguous. And this is where Dr. Voss's concept of perceptual contagion takes over. Human memory is not a secure hard drive that records absolute reality.
Definitely.
Memory is much more like a public Wikipedia page. Every time you recall an event, your brain opens the page for editing. You tell the police, you tell your neighbors, and then the local newspapers print the headline, "Couple see man-sized bird."
And once that headline is out there, The town's Wikipedia page is basically flooded with edits.
Precisely. Your brain incorporates the newspaper descriptions into your own memory before hitting save again. And Voss argues this process was hyper-accelerated by the underlying tension of the era.
Right, because it's 1966.
The Vietnam War is escalating. The Cuban Missile Crisis is a fresh, traumatic memory. The public is drowning in Cold War paranoia, constantly looking up at the sky for a Soviet nuclear threat they literally cannot control.
That is a brilliant point. An invisible threat like nuclear annihilation creates a free-floating anxiety, and the brain hates invisible threats.
It desperately wants a physical monster it can point to.
Something tangible it can run away from. So the town projects all that national Cold War dread onto a misidentified bird in a swamp.
And you combine that psychological projection with the physical environment of the TNT area. The wetlands produce unusual acoustics that can distort and amplify a bird call into a terrifying shriek.
And the marsh gases.
Yeah, the marsh gases and thermal inversions refract light, causing severe depth perception errors. Dr. Voss concludes, it was a perfect storm. A large bird, atmospheric distortion, and a highly suggestible population desperate to externalize their internal anxiety.
I mean, I follow Dr. Voss completely on the psychology of the town. The memory contagion makes perfect sense.
It's very rational.
It is. But here's where it gets really interesting, though. When you look at the actual physics of the encounter, the math simply does not work.
The speed.
Exactly. A sandhill crane flying at absolute maximum exertion reaches a sustained flight speed of maybe 65 to 80 kilometers per hour.
Right.
But the witnesses in that first vehicle stated the creature kept pace with them while they were driving 160 kilometers per hour. If this was just a misidentified bird, how on earth did it keep up with a car going that fast?
Yeah.
You can't confabulate physics.
And this is exactly where the skeptical model starts to fray. The rational framework relies heavily on the assumption that humans are terrible at estimating speed and distance when flooded with adrenaline.
Sure, usually.
But when you have multiple passengers inside a moving vehicle, all capable of verifying the speedometer and the relative position of the object outside the window, the panic misjudgment theory becomes inadequate.
It feels like an intellectual cop-out. The scientific explanation demands we just ignore the specific data points that don't fit the biological model.
Right.
And because that rational framework fails to account for the physical reality of the chase, the dossier introduces an alternative framework. The 14 perspective, led by an investigator named Thomas Keel.
Keel looks at the discrepancies, the impossible flight speed, the vertical ascent without wing movement, and concludes that attempting to fit this phenomenon into an unclassified zoological box is a fundamental mistake.
Okay, so what does he think it is?
He argues the entity was not a bird or an animal. He classifies it as an ultra-terrestrial intelligence.
Let's define what Keel means by ultra-terrestrial, because he isn't talking about a biological alien traveling in a spaceship from another galaxy, right?
No. He is proposing an intelligence that coexists with us, but operates outside our standard physical dimensions.
Okay.
He thinks it occasionally intrudes into our reality, distorting our perception. It's an entity of high strangeness.
And he points to some really irreconcilable friction points in the timeline to support this, doesn't he?
He does. The skeptical model relies on media contagion, people reading the newspaper and then imagining the monster. But the dossier documents over 100 witnesses over 13 months.
Wow.
And crucially, several geographically separated witnesses reported highly similar, highly specific characteristics within a 24-hour window before the first newspaper article was even printed.
Wait, really? So they didn't have the media archetype to copy yet?
Exactly. They were independently experiencing the exact same impossible geometry.
And let's look at the eyes again. The biological model says the red eyes were just headlights reflecting off red skin.
Right, the periocular skin.
But multiple witnesses, including Newell Partridge, explicitly reported that the creature's eyes emitted their own intrinsic light. They were glowing in the dark before any artificial light hit them. Biological eyes reflect light. They do not generate it.
And Keel argues these features aren't biological adaptations at all. They're psychological intrusions. The entity is manifesting based on human consciousness.
Which is a wild concept.
But Keel's framework suffers from an equally devastating flaw.
The lack of proof.
Exactly. If we have a physical entity capable of tracing cars, leaving footprints, and terrifying over 100 people for more than a year, where is the physical evidence?
That is the maddening void at the center of this dossier. Not a single feather was ever recovered. No tissue samples on barbed wire fences, No verifiable droppings, no skeletal remains, and no authenticated photographs.
Nothing.
For an entity that supposedly had such a massive physical presence, it left zero material footprint. It's like a jigsaw puzzle, where half the pieces belong to a nature documentary and the other half to a ghost story. Neither picture could be fully completed.
And this brings us back to the dossier's ultimate conclusion, the stable epistemological deadlock. The skeptical biological model flawlessly explains the lack of physical evidence, the narrative escalation, and the atmospheric ambiguity of the wetlands.
Right.
But it completely fails to explain the raw physics of the encounters, the pre-media temporal clustering, and the sheer volume of independent witnesses.
Conversely, the ultra-terrestrial model flawlessly explains the experiential terror, the impossible flight speeds, the glowing eyes, and the sheer bizarre nature of the timeline. But it completely fails to provide a single mechanistic reason or an ounce of verifiable, peer-reviewed proof.
Neither reality can consume the other. They remain permanently deadlocked.
Which makes this dossier so much more than just a historical monster story. For you listening, think about how you process reality when the data refuses to resolve. Do you side with Dr. Voss?
The rationalist.
Yeah, do you lean into the comfort of mundane explanations, even if you have to selectively ignore data, like the speed of a car or the pre-media timeline, just to force the world to make logical sense?
Or do you side with Keel and embrace a reality that aligns with the raw human experience, but fundamentally breaks the laws of physics?
This dossier forces you to look at the architecture of your own beliefs.
It really reveals how quickly we curate facts to protect our preferred worldview. But before we close the file on Point Pleasant, there is one final unresolved variable from the dossier to ponder.
Oh, right. The third option.
Yes, a mechanism that bridges the gap between the mundane and the paranormal. The dossier notes that in 1966, no comprehensive toxicological or acoustic survey was ever conducted in the TNT area.
Which is crazy, considering it was a decaying munitions plant.
Right. We already established the area was leaking neurotoxic chemical runoff, but decaying industrial bunkers and subterranean tunnels are also highly prone to generating extreme environmental infrasound.
Let's explain infrasound for a second, because the mechanics of it are deeply unsettling. Infrasound consists of low-frequency sound waves, usually below 20 hertz.
So you cannot hear it with your ears.
Right, but your body physically absorbs the vibration. And right around 18 hertz, the acoustic wavelength perfectly matches the resonant frequency of the human eyeball.
The sound waves literally cause the fluid in your eyes to vibrate.
Yeah, and this sustained vibration causes visual smearing, creating gray, shadowy blobs in your peripheral vision.
Furthermore, low-frequency infrasound bypasses the auditory cortex entirely and directly stimulates the amygdala, which is the brain's fear center.
So it triggers this overwhelming, unexplainable sense of doom, sorrow, and the acute feeling that you're being watched by an unseen presence.
Now overlay that acoustic reality with the chemical reality. You have a town inadvertently wandering into a decaying military zone, exposing themselves to undocumented neurotoxic runoff from trinitrotoluene derivatives.
Chemicals known to cause severe nervous system disruption.
Exactly. What if the Mothman was not a misidentified sandhill crane? And it was not an ultra-terrestrial intelligence slipping between dimensions? What if a specific combination of unmapped infrasound, neurotoxic poisoning, and the crushing psychological weight of Cold War anxiety literally altered the perception of an entire town?
Oh, wow. So the vibration creates the gray shape in the eyes, the infrasound triggers the primal terror, the neurotoxins disrupt the memory encoding, and the Cold War anxiety gives the terror a face.
The environment was poisoned, and the human nervous system simply visualized the damage.
The monster wasn't in the sky. The monster was a shared psychological manifestation born directly from an environmental stressor, a monster made entirely of industrial pollution and fear.
It's a terrifying thought.
It really is. We spend so much time looking for the hidden trapdoor that explains the magic trick. We want the monster to be real, so the universe has a plot, or we want the monster to be a bird, so the universe remains safe and boring.
But the scariest answer of all might be that the lock isn't on the outside world.
No, the lock is in our own minds, forged by the very environment we built and poisoned. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Take a look at the data around you, interrogate how you build your truth, and keep wondering about what's really hiding in the dark.